Ukraine is marking 4 years since the liberation of Bucha, north of Kyiv, where Russian forces committed some of the worst atrocities of the war. In the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, Russian troops killed hundreds of civilians there, although Moscow continues to deny this. Foreign diplomats say the war crimes remain an open wound on the soul of Ukraine and Europe. A warning, our report contains images that you may find disturbing.
The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, and Ukraine's foreign minister, Andrei Sybiha, lead a delegation commemorating the Bucha massacre by Russian forces 4 years ago. For the visiting officials, it's a show of solidarity. For Kyiv, it's a moment to underscore the importance of justice.
The main emphasis and focus of this meeting is accountability, the accountability of Russian criminals, the accountability of the Russian aggressor.
Bucha has become a symbol of Russian brutality. Putin's troops occupied the city in the early days of the full-scale war. Weeks later, Ukrainian forces retook it. What they found was shocking. More than 400 bodies, many with signs of torture and mutilation. The trail of death was widely seen as the first evidence of Russian war crimes. Allegations backed up by the United Nations. Germany's foreign minister, Johann Wadefuhl, said Bucha remains an open wound on the soul of Ukraine and Europe, while Kallas emphasized the need to keep Ukraine on the international agenda.
It is so important, like you say, in addition to the war that is going on in the Middle East, that we don't let Ukraine slip off the table, because this is happening here and now. This is part of Europe, and that's why it's also Europe's concern that this war will end with just and lasting peace.
With peace talks stalled, the visit sends a clear signal that the EU isn't leaving Ukraine's side.
Let's bring in our correspondent, Jan-Philipp Scholz, who joins us from Kyiv. Jan-Philipp, a group of European foreign ministers traveled to Ukraine today. We saw it there for this anniversary. What have been the key messages from their visit?
The trip has been, above all, a symbolic visit. Of course, Europe has come without any concrete new financial commitments. The big issue for Ukraine remains Hungary's blocking of the 90 billion EU package. So there hasn't been any news on this. But of course, more than 10 ministers and high-ranking EU officials traveling to Ukraine is a strong statement, and they have all made it clear that the EU continues to firmly stand by Ukraine in this war. But above all, a symbolic visit, and Europe trying that Ukraine remains in the news despite the focus on the Middle East at the moment.
Before we brought you in, we heard the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, warn precisely of that Ukraine and the war there should not be allowed to slip off the agenda. Is there a feeling in Ukraine that that is what's happening?
Yes, that's a very big fear here in Ukraine, that the world's attention is only on the Middle East, that the world might lose its interest. This is less about Europe. It's also about Europe, but less about Europe, and of course much more about the United States. And it's also a very concrete fear. It's the fear that military aid by the United States might be reduced significantly because it's needed in the Middle East. And we're talking especially about ammunition for air defense systems in Ukraine, which are vital for the survival of the country.
What everyone is hoping for there, of course, and all around Ukraine is that this war will sometime soon come to an end. There have been peace talks led by the U.S. Has there been any progress there in recent times?
I don't see any progress because of this focus on the Middle East. The talks have basically come to a complete standstill. The big sticking point remains that Russia continues to claim the territories in the east. There have also been some major misunderstandings in recent days between Ukraine and the United States. The misunderstanding was basically about how much future security guarantees by the US are dependent on Ukraine giving up this territory in the east. So I don't see any progress at the moment regarding peace talks. There has been an initiative by Ukraine now to at least propose some kind of ceasefire now during the Easter holidays. But what we have heard from Russia so far also doesn't seem very promising in this regard.
That was DW correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz in Kyiv. Thanks so much for all of that. Earlier, I spoke to Oleksandra Matviichuk, a human rights lawyer and head of the Ukrainian nonprofit organization, the Center for Civil Liberties, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. I asked her about the meaning of the Bucha killings to her.
I was in Kyiv 4 years ago when large-scale war started. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. And when Russian army was pushed from Kyiv region, we immediately sent mobile groups to Bucha, to Matizhin, to Irpin, to Vorzel, to other cities and settlements in Kyiv region, and we was shocked because we found dead bodies of civilians who lay scattered around the streets until their liberation. We found dead bodies of civilians in the gardens of their own households. We found dead bodies of civilians in mass graves, men and women with their hands tied under their back. We found dead bodies of civilians in cars, the whole family with children who were deliberately shot while they just trying to escape from the dangerous zone. So this was Bucha for me and my memory.
Yeah, it's a terrible account. You have spoken of a painful gap between what has been documented among other organizations by yours, of course, and what has been prosecuted. What's keeping that evidence from reaching the courtroom, and whose responsibility do you think it is to close that gap you speak of?
We face with accountability gap which have several dimensions. The first is connected with an enormous amount of crimes which we are documenting, because Russia uses war crimes as a method of warfare. So Russian soldiers are deliberately inflicted immense pain on civilians and committing murder, rape, torture, and other kinds of crimes. It's just a tool how to break people's resistance and occupy the country. And it's difficult to investigate such a huge amount of crimes during the war, even for the best national system in the world. Ukraine hasn't the best national system in the world. We need international support to do it. And second gap is the case that there is no international court that can prosecute Putin and his surrounding for the crime of aggression. Even International Criminal Court in The Hague have no such jurisdiction.
The Council of Europe, very aware of that, working together with Ukraine, is trying to establish a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Does that give you hope?
Yes, it was a revolutionary decision which Council of Europe made last June to establish a special tribunal on aggression and to fill this gap. Because why it's important, all international crimes that we are documenting, it's result of the leadership decision of Putin and his surrounding to break the peace and to start this bloody war. But almost a year has passed and just 5 countries have joined to special tribunal on aggression, and we are waiting when Germany, when other countries will join to this court, because it's not Putin who prevent this to happen. It's a question of historical responsibility and courage of European leadership.
Moscow has already announced that it will reject the body's legitimacy and consider participation in a hostile act. Does that mean in a way that the tribunal is doomed to fail, or how could it still fulfill its mission?
Moscow can reject reality, but it doesn't mean that we have do nothing. Moscow ignore all decisions of international organizations and break all provisions of international law. There is no surprise in such attitude of Moscow to special tribunal on aggression. The surprise for me is this delay. Once again, I don't understand why Germany, why other countries are not still there.
When you speak to survivors from Bucha directly, what do they tell you about what justice means to them?
I spoke with people affected by this war directly multiple times, and I know that they see justice very differently. For some people, justice means to see their perpetrators behind the bars. For another people, justice means to get compensations, and without compensations, they will feel unsatisfied. For some people, justice means just to know truth, what happened with their beloved ones. For other people, justice means a possibility to be publicly heard and to get this public recognition that something that happened with them and their families, it's not just immoral, but also illegal. And we need to build a comprehensive justice strategy to reach all these needs.
U.S. President Donald Trump ran on the promise of ending the war on day one of his return to the White House, and you have fiercely criticized leaked U.S.-Russian peace proposals that include amnesties for war crimes, and you've warned that this would embolden aggressors around the world. What would an agreement of that sort mean to you if it really came to pass and be part of a peace deal for Ukraine?
We have no illusion. Justice is not a value for United States administration. As well, it's very naive to think that Russia will sign any peace treaty with a point with accountability. So our goal is clear. We have to make justice as independent international parallel track to all peace negotiation process. What do I mean? International Criminal Court don't care what will be in peace treaty. International Criminal Court will not stop its investigation, will not withdraw its arrest warrants. So our task is, while we still have window of opportunity, to create several more such international institutions like Special Tribunal on Aggression, International Registry of Damage, and to confiscate Russian frozen assets, because justice has also financial side and people need compensations for crimes that Russia committed.
There's Nobel Peace Prize laureate Oleksandra Matviichuk. Thank you so much for your time. All the best to you.
Thanks.